India, that is Bharat. One country, two names. Catherine Clementine Ojha. Introduction. In The Discovery of India, a book that he composed in the Ahmednagar fort during his years of captivity, 1942 to 1946, and published in 1946, Jawaharlal Nehru, 1946, 38 to 39, wrote, Often as I wandered from meeting to meeting, I spoke to my audiences of this India of ours, of Hindustan and of Bharat, the old Sanskrit name derived from the mythical founders of the race. When the Discovery of India was published, these names, Hindustan, Bharat, also Bharata, India, coexisted in the subcontinent. Of constant usage also was Hind, as in Jai Hind, victory to Hind. The battle cry that Nehru, like several other political leaders, liked to proclaim at the end of his speeches. To capture these various meanings today is not an easy task. It entails being aware of the simple and yet too often forgotten fact that words have a history of their own. They do not maintain the same signification throughout time. The terms with which we name reality participate in the construction of reality, in the perception that we have and give of it. Take the name India. Since its ancient use by the Greek, Indice, and Latin, India authors, it has been applied to a variety of territories as, for example, Yule and Burnell remind us in the famous Hobson-Jobson. Or take the word Hindustan, which was already used in Persia in the 3rd century BC to refer to the land lying beyond the Indus River. Its definition, too, has always been accompanied by some confusion. A comparison of 18th and 19th century British maps show that the size and political designation of the territory corresponding to Hindustan changed over time along with historical developments. Barrow, 2011. It was associated with the land of the Mughals as, for example, in the History of Hindustan by Alexander Dow, 1792, or in the Memoir of a Map of Hindustan, or the page 3, Mughal Empire, 1793, by Rennell. Did it then refer only to North India, the South being called Deccan? Or was it equivalent to the whole subcontinent as in the maps of the British Empire by the 1840s? And then in the compound of Hindustan, the word Hindu itself raised the difficulty of interpretation. It too had changed as everything changed around it. From being a geographic and ethnic term, it became a religious term, as in the late 19th century slogan Hindi, Hindu, Hindustan, that linked national identity to one language, one religious denomination, and one territory, or, as we will see later, in the Sanskritized Hindustana, the Persian Stan and the Sanskrit Sthana both mean place, of the radical political activist Vinayak Damodar Savarkar's Hindutva, published in 1923, which referred to the land of the Hindus, to a people therefore, and not to a river. At the time of independence then, the name Bharat, India, Al-Hind and Hindustan coexisted to designate the Indian subcontinent. Those who, like Nehru, used them side by side understood their differences and knew how to interpret the contrasting usages. Even if, given the complicated history of each, they did not agree on the nature of their differences. What they all agreed upon was that their meaning and usage were context and language sensitive. In 1950, 4 years after the publication of Nehru's Discovery of India, the drafters of the constitution of the larger of the two successor states of British India decided how the country should be known. In the opening article of the Constitution of India, they wrote, India, that is Bharat, shall be a union of states. Two names, one, India, associated with the foreigners whose rule was coming to an end, the other, Bharat. Sanskrit, Bharata, also Bharatvarsha, perceived as native because it was found in ancient Sanskrit literature. Henceforth, no other name beside these two was to be used legally. In this disco political conception, India and Bharat were to be interchangeable terms. What are we to make of the equation of Bharat and India in the Constitution? How did such a double name formula come about? This is the main question dealt with here. My argument is that the Constitutional Assembly's decision should be understood as the outcome of a long historical process with deep cultural roots. I will also make the point, though more briefly, that this process did not stop with the promulgation of the Constitution. Critical to an inquiry of if Bharat could be equated with India at all, I contend, are pre-existing definitions of Bharat and also of Hindustan, found in different textual sources. I present some of them in the first part of the paper, focusing more particularly on the definition of Bharat given by the Puranas. Then I consider the shift from the Puranic Bharat to the colonial Bharat, when the old toponym became the indigenous name for a budding nation exposed to the imported political and geographical conception of British India. I also briefly examine the pre-independence destiny of the word Hindustan. In the next part of the paper, I analyze the arguments exchanged by the members of the Constitutional Assembly when they adopted and discussed the double naming of the new nation. For this section, I rely on the official recordings of the debates in English found on a website maintained by the Indian government. Finally, I thought it interesting to give a sample of contemporary reactions on the basis of information published in the printed press and on the internet. These indicate that to this day, the Constitutional Assembly's decision to give the country two names remains a baffling subject for Indian citizens. Conclusion. The politics of naming is part of the social production of the nation. Its processes are shaped by broad socio-political conditions and can be studied from several angles. In this paper, I have adopted a cultural history perspective. My purpose has been to look at some of the inherited discourses on Bharat, both prior to and at the time of its official equation with India in the Constitution of 1950. To begin with, I attempted to characterize the memory that was taken in by those who in the 19th century used the name Bharat to refer to the geographical, political and administrative entity that the colonial power called India. The evidence presented shows that it was the Puranic memory of a naturally bounded, see mountains, and specifically socially organized territory where human beings could fulfill the specific sets of social religious duties required to maintain their cultural identity. That Bharat, a cultural space whose unity was to be found in the social order of Dharma, was a pre-national construction and not a page 15 national project. Then I argued that at the time of independence, India and Bharat were equally worthy candidates to baptize the newly born nation along with Hindustan. But the opening article of the Constitution disregarded Hindustan and registered the nation under a dual and bilingual identity, India, that is Bharat. One name was to be used as the equivalent or the translation of the other, as exemplified on the cover of the national passport, where the English Republic of India corresponds to the Hindi Bharat Ganarajya, or perhaps even more telling, on India postage stamps, where the two words Bharat and India are co-located. Pursuing the history of the reception of the constitutional equation of Bharat and India in all its social and political complexities was beyond the scope of my inquiry. I have merely pointed to the two contemporary phenomena. The name Hindustan has continued to be widely used in spite of, or maybe thanks to, its plurality of meanings, and the implication of the equivalence of Bharat with India has remained a subject of debate. It is likely that all these names will continue to be interpreted to fit new circumstances, to give new meanings to India's national identity, an ongoing open-ended process.